Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. I know most of us are aware that mental illness is on the rise in general, but we're also seeing a rise in mental illness and the needs to treat it in younger and younger children. Parents are seeking support in a lot of different ways, and today, Britt Parramore is going to join us. Britt is a licensed therapist and the clinical director of Pathlight Counseling, Behavioral Health, and Treatment Services, where he leads transformative care and support for individuals on their journey to mental wellness. His services include Georgia's only intensive outpatient programs for teens. Now, this talk today is going to be a little bit more clinical than normal because there's something very specific going on that Britt wants to bring awareness to. But in the same vein, he also has a very personal story, and so you get the best of both worlds. He has lived through addiction, and he's going to share with us an urgent concern that he has that's plaguing our teens across the nation. Britt's not only going to give us insight, but he's going to equip us so that we're able to help our kids. So let's lean in and be informed. Hey, Britt, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Suzanne. I really appreciate you inviting me to come on the show today.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I'm going to give just a little bit of a background. I heard you speak, and there was something that you said, and I thought, I am going to call Britt. You said that there was a topic that you were speaking about, and regardless of any stage that you were on or what you were being asked to speak about, you were making sure that this, every time you had an opportunity, this was something parents were hearing. And when you said that, it pricked me because I thought, it's one thing to feel so convicted about something that you need to share it or it's that urgent. But when you're saying that someone's asked me to speak about it, and whether they've asked me to speak about this or not, I'm still going to do it. That to me is God has put something on your heart, and it really jumped out. And so I really wanted you to come on today because I want to help you do that. And so there's a very specific topic that we're going to talk about. But before we do that, I would love for people to know a little bit of your background, what you do,
Sure.
How long you've been doing it. Can you share that with us first?
Sure. So I started, along with my wife, Pathlight Counseling in 2017. I did this after spending several years at Liberty University, getting my degrees in psychology, theology. I was an adjunct professor there for multiple years, teaching Old Testament survey, Middle Eastern studies, theology, things like that. And so when I finished my psychology degree, the goal was always to start a practice, moved to Georgia from Lynchburg, Virginia, had to go through my post-grad internship years. And then in 2017, we finally started Pathlight Counseling. And at the same time, I started Pathlight Restoration House, which was a Christian sober living environment for men. Pathlight was started as just a counseling practice, but we also opened an intensive outpatient program, which is a facility. And what intensive outpatient is for people with addiction or a dual diagnosis, meaning they have a mental health diagnosis too. They'll come to a combination of group and individual counseling along with psychiatry. And so we started with adults. In 2019, especially in 2020, when COVID hit, there started to be a much bigger need for adolescent intensive outpatient programs and adolescent therapists. And so we went through the process of starting and having another intensive outpatient program for adolescents licensed. And we've been doing that ever since then. Along with Pathlight Counseling, I do a lot of things in the community. I serve on different boards, both for the county and at the state level. In the county level, Cherokee County here in Georgia, I serve on a board called Drug Free Cherokee, which in the Cherokee Suicide Prevention Coalition, which it's the people on that board are stakeholders in the county, like the judges and prosecutors and nonprofits who have an interest in helping kids in different areas. And this case, it's suicide and addiction. Also operate all the treatment clinical services for one of the Cherokee County juvenile court programs called Family Accountability Court. Uh, that also has the Department of Family and Child Services involved. Another thing I do is I teach a class at a local alternative school where kids who have been expelled for drug related offenses can go to the alternative school. They can go through my class and do some other things called the redemption program. They can earn their way back to the school they were expelled from.
So you're
And
seeing a broad range, a broad range of areas and seeing kids and families from a lot of different standpoints.
Yeah, it's a broad range, but there's a lot of commonalities in the
Mm-hmm.
demographics we treat, which is, and especially for the purpose of this podcast, teens and young adults struggling with addiction and mental health issues. I just do it at a lot of in a lot of different contexts, and then I serve on a state board called Georgians for Responsible Marijuana Policy that is trying to prevent the legalization of marijuana in the state of Georgia.
So you see a lot. You've been doing this for a while, but there's one topic that is heavy on your heart, and it sounds like it's a newer thing,
It is.
and you've been watching this a little bit. I would love for you to just jump right in and share this with parents and kind of help them understand what is going on and where kids might be getting involved.
Sure. And once again, I'm so grateful for this platform to be able to discuss this. And you're right. I am I'm blessed to be able to speak in public a lot. And 100% of the time when I speak in public, no matter what the topic is, I find some way to talk about the research that I'm doing. And so I kind of want to preface what I'm doing with a little bit of my past. I had a really terrible addiction problem in my 20s. I went into the military, got out of the military, went to college, and uh, fell deep, deep, deep into addiction. So much so that within 7 years, I was homeless, sleeping in a park. And I used every kind of drug imaginable, smoked pot every day of my life for about 5 years, which was a gateway to harder drugs. And long story short, I went and got help, and it changed my life. It changed the course of my life. I went through a treatment facility. When I graduated, they could see I was changed, and they hired me to work there, answering the phones, talking to folks that needed help. I fell in love with it. That's why I went back to school. So my research in 2019, I had a young man, 16 years old, who came to my office because of some of the mental health symptoms he was dealing with, which were auditory and visual hallucinations, manic episodes, paranoia. People were had planted microphones in the light bulbs in his house, uh, delusional thinking, and that's indicative of schizophrenia, the diagnosis schizophrenia. And while that does happen in 16-year-olds, it's rare for it to happen in 16-year-olds. When it does, it's usually because there's a long family history of it. There's a big genetic component. Sometimes stimulant ADHD drugs can cause schizophrenia symptoms. It's called stimulant induced psychosis or stimulant induced psychotic disorder. But once they stop taking the medication, the symptoms go away within a few months. None of those applied to this kid, though. He had no family history. He's never been on any type of stimulants. Uh, and, I was asking him, well, but what about other drugs you use? And he said, all I do is smoke carts. And I said, what is a cart? He said it's short for cartridge, and it's a high THC oil that is ingested through a vape pen. Well, I used to smoke pot every day of my life, and I never had psychosis. It was a gateway drug. It made me lazy, got fat eating Cheetos all day long, but I never, nothing like what this kid was experiencing had ever happened to me. And so the marijuana plant, the cannabis plant, has multiple different alkaloids, ingredients, uh, THC, CBD, CBG, amongst many others. And so THC is in the same classification of drugs as LSD, acid. It causes hallucinations, that kind of thing. But the national average for THC levels in the plant, uh, which is what I was smoking back in the 90s, the national average of THC level is 16%. The rest is CBD, CBG, which are actually things that are really good for us. We have a neurochemical in our body that's naturally occurring called anandamide, similar to endorphin. Anandamide is where you get your runner's high. Uh, Anandamide is an endocannabinoid, which just means a cannabis within us. If you look at a molecule of anandamide next to a molecule of CBD, or the cannabis plant, they look identical. And so uh, people with high anandamide levels never get schizophrenia. They don't get anxiety. They rarely ever get depression. So when you're ingesting, say, CBD, your body thinks it's anandamide, right? And it has this
Okay.
calming effect. So in the marijuana plant, the cannabis plant, it's the THC that gets you high, but that calming effect that it has is because of the CBD and the other things in there. So what I learned when this young man told me he was smoking carts, and I Googled it, and there wasn't a whole lot online about it back then in 2019. I did find out that they have 97. What they figured out how to isolate just the THC out of the plant and put it into an oil form. I found that out, but I still didn't think it could cause this. There was nothing in the literature about it causing the symptoms this kid had. Now, we've known for 50 years that if somebody was going to develop schizophrenia because of a long family history, smoking pot will speed that process up. But never had we seen it cause schizophrenia symptoms in somebody who wasn't going to get it anyway. So for this first 16-year-old, I thought I just had this really rare case of a 16-year-old developing schizophrenia with no family history and no stimulant use. That's what I chalked it up to. Uh, and 2 weeks later, another kid comes in, 15 years old.
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later, with the exact same presentation, full blown schizophrenia, no family history, no stimulant use, smoking carts. Well, so a light bulb, a red flag went up at that point, and I started calling around to some of the better addiction medicine schools and asking them about it. They had started seeing it too. None of my colleagues in Georgia, none of the people I work with had ever heard of it. Uh,
And this
and
is 5 years ago. This is, I
5 years
mean,
ago.
this is, yeah. Wow.
And that first kid, the 16-year-old, had a football scholarship to go play for the University of Florida. As of now, he's not going to be able to live on his own again the rest of his life if we can't figure out a way to reverse this. So, unlike developing these symptoms, if somebody takes stimulants, when you stop taking the stimulant, it goes away. Right now, if cannabis is causing this, which is called cannabis-induced psychotic disorder, it looks like it's permanent. Fast forward to today, and I've probably seen close to 50 patients or more who have started or have developed full blown symptoms. It does not happen in adults. It does not happen in men over about 27 and women over
Really?
25. Does not.
Which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but a typical diagnosis of schizophrenia isn't sort of that late late 20s, early 30s in males.
Yeah.
Is that the more common
Er,
time that you see that?
yeah. So early adulthood to the 30s is when I see it, absent of substance use. I've seen a lot of adults who use methamphetamine, and
Yeah.
even when they quit, they'll have the schizophrenia symptoms, but it goes away within 6 months. And
But wait. So you're saying a 30-year-old or a 27-year-old male who smokes a cart like a 16-year-old male, this is not happening to them. So is the connection that it's only happening in a developing brain?
that's it. And so our brains, there's the two biggest periods of brain development are birth to age 6, then 11 to age 18, and especially in our frontal cortex, and in our dopamine system. And so the latest research, and now there's a lot of major universities are researching this, uh, and there's some different theories about what's happening, but we know it's the anandamide system that I mentioned earlier. Uh, at high levels of THC, your brain thinks it's anandamide, so it destroys the anandamide system permanently, which destroys the dopamine system, which schizophrenia is uh, a disorder of the dopamine system. Uh, and so it's really, really heartbreaking. For the last 5 years, I've spoken about it in public multiple times up until 2023. Uh, I didn't, I got, every time I would speak, even if it was in a room full of clinicians, a lot of them didn't believe me and they wanted to see my research. And I started showing them the research, and slowly, more people in my field started to take this seriously. Fast forward to today, because I spoke out about it so much, different people had heard me speak. Uh, I think it was in 2023, I heard a national radio talk show host, conservative talk show host, quote me. I've never met him before. Uh, Fox News quoted me. I've never been on Fox News. So the point is, people heard this information and started to put it out there. And that's really encouraging. So now I've got 7 conferences I've been invited with some of my colleagues to speak at on this topic. Now, I've never been invited to speak at these big conferences before, so it really has nothing to do with me. It has to do with people, clinicians, doctors are finally starting to take this seriously.
I have so many questions, but the first one that comes to mind is where are the kids buying it? Is it accessible? I mean, you said you Googled it and there wasn't a ton out there, but you did find it and kind of figured out what it was. But how and where are they buying it? What does it look like? Like, what is it?
Yeah, so it's a glass cartridge that looks like a nicotine cartridge. Kids vape different nicotine mixtures that are in oil form, and they use vape pens to do it. It looks just like that. Uh, and so in the state of Georgia, it's a felony to possess it. In the state of Georgia, under an ounce of the plant is a misdemeanor. And we now, unfortunately, have medical marijuana in Georgia with a 5% THC level or lower, which I'm glad it doesn't go over 5%. Other states aren't like that. We think this was first developed in California, laboratories in California. Um, One of the boards that I sit on, Drug Free Cherokee, also has members of the multi county drug task force. And so I get to hear about a lot of the busts that they make. And uh, they've confiscated a lot of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds of carts coming through the mail from California. One thing that's really interesting is last year they did a bust. It was a storage unit that a man owned, And they found 800 pounds worth of these carts in the storage unit. And they found hundreds of DoorDash bags and DoorDash stickers. And so kids order it via Snapchat. And then it's
Okay, wait.
delivered to the house in some kind of legitimate form, like a DoorDash bag with what seems to be a DoorDash driver.
Okay, will you just say it one more time for the parent? I mean, this is called the informed parent for a
Sure.
reason. Like this is a big deal. Parents, please listen.
I'll tell you how big of a deal I think it is. I say this all the time. I'm way more concerned about this than I am the fentanyl crisis. Way, way more concerned. You know, I I speak to a lot of really great kids who they would never try heroin or fentanyl, but the
Right.
perception of risk for all things THC is so low, they don't think there's a
Mm.
risk. And if it was just the plant, I wouldn't spend all this time and effort researching it. So kids are ingesting this stuff. And by the way, it doesn't matter if it's a cart. It also comes in edible forms, multiple different forms. It doesn't matter what the ingestion method is, it's the level of THC. And so there is some level of THC that if you get over it, call it 50 or 60%, is when it starts destroying the anandamide system. So it doesn't matter how they ingest it. And so, unfortunately, it's too late when some of these kids find out and they've already developed the symptoms. And the only time I've ever seen the symptoms reversed was in a 21-year-old who didn't start using it till he was 20. So the younger someone uses it, uh, the increased risk of developing cannabis-induced psychotic disorder is exponentially higher the younger they are.
So this is like what you're saying too is, this is something that they're vaping and they could just be in the bathroom at school not thinking this is a big deal because kids are vaping all kinds of things. And they're just thinking this is like the bubble gum flavored whatever I'm vaping over here. This is just that.
Well, I think kids know what they're vaping once they've done it before, but the teachers don't always know. They're getting wise to it. But the kids in my class at ACE Academy, the alternative school, the only ones that go through my class are ones who have been expelled for drug related or substance related stuff, and 98% is for smoking carts or something like that. They tell me there's never a day in any school in our county from middle school to high school that some kid has not used high THC on school premises.
And just for the listeners, describing Cherokee County, it's how would you describe Cherokee County? I mean, this
So,
is not inner city. This is not, huge amounts of wealth. This is like what, just describe that community. I
sure.
just think it's important for parents to understand where you live and what you're talking about.
Yeah, and sorry, I forget that I'm not speaking to just Georgia folks here. So Cherokee County is a North Atlanta suburb, a suburb of North Atlanta. It's the fifth largest county in Georgia, and it's one of the top three most affluent counties in Georgia. And so upper middle class, fantastic school system, great leadership. Cherokee County is a red county, is always a red county. Uh, Fantastic churches in Cherokee County and the surrounding counties. And so this is not the inner city. Uh, and what I've found out is this is way more prevalent in affluent places than it is in the more or less affluent places. That's Cherokee County.
So help parents. Okay, now they have this information. To be honest, this is not fun to hear. This is not one of the fun conversations. I mean, I do some of those. This is not that. So help parents understand with this information, how do you talk to your kids about this? There are a couple of things that are just reality right now. One is just sometimes teens think parents are overreacting, I would say, on a normal average, in a normal average family. We also are in a culture where kids, even in their schools, and through a lot of what we're seeing going on, especially in public education, but also in some of the elite private schools, where kids are being told your parents don't understand what's going on culturally. They're not legitimate. We're the safe place. Your parents don't know what they're talking about. And so we're in this crazy cultural spot, generally speaking, about just your values, much less something that my parents don't get it, or they don't do it, or this is the new thing on the block. So how do parents have the conversation without sounding like an alarmist, or, triggering all the things that sort of just happen in the typical teenage parent relationship?
Sure. So this is the most common question that I get, and I'm glad it's the most common question. And to give it some context, uh, at the church where you heard me speak, Restoration, I've spoken there a couple times in the last few months. When I spoke on this topic and we were done speaking, I, I stayed for almost 3 hours because there was 25 people in line, all parents waiting to talk to me because
That's
they
called
had
chills. Mm-hmm.
experienced this. And it's like that at every church that I speak in. And so, uh, these are wonderful Christian, Christ following parents who are not divorced. Typically, I would say 90% of the teens I treat for emotional problems, their parents are divorced. I'm not finding it with this, though, with the high THC. And so here's what I tell parents. When I was using hard drugs, I knew they could kill me. I did them anyway. I thought that I could manage the risk. And I'm still alive, so apparently I did, although we came pretty close a few times. And so using scare tactics with kids, I don't think works. I think that educating kids is what works. And so that's what I do. A lot of the things I'm telling you, I use appropriate teenage language. I tell them. And one of the stories I always tell them is I had a kid, she started using them when she was 14 and heard me speak at the school, and she completely stopped. No pot, no drugs, no nothing. We were drug testing her. She completely stopped, and 8 months later, the symptoms developed. After she'd been stopped, she had no symptoms for that 8 months, and then it happened. Then it developed. And so these kids are, you know, I've been smoking this stuff a lot, and I don't have any of these symptoms. You never know when the symptoms are going to begin. The way you will know for a parent is if your kid is experiencing anxiety when they didn't experience it before. They cause significant withdrawal syndromes, really similar to opioid withdrawals, heroin withdrawals. And so you'll see your kid look like they have the flu for 2 weeks, right? And when parents see that, that's when I encourage them to have this conversation. Luckily, there are a ton of great YouTube videos out there about this. When I speak to kids, I always say, I'm going to show you my psychic powers right now. I bet none of you believe what I'm saying, right? And they say, in the beginning, they would always say, no, I don't believe you. How'd you know that? Well, it's not because I'm psychic, because that would have been my response when I was their age. I don't believe it. So I give them resources to go look it up online for themselves. Uh, and then I also talk a little bit about what some of the experts in this field, the research experts in this field, are saying about it. Uh, the research I've done is with Emory Medical School, but there are people even more highly specialized who who are talking about this and researching this, and some of the things they're saying are terrifying. And so the key term we look for, or the key term that we need to communicate, is causal effect, right? Since we've known that if someone was going to get schizophrenia anyway, smoking any THC will speed that process up. They were going to get it anyway. The debate, although not so much anymore, is can high THC can it have a causal effect absent from a family history? And so I'm going to read you a couple of quotes. Give me just a sec. All right. There are hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific articles that show a correlation between marijuana use and psychotic outcomes, such as schizophrenia. The question of whether marijuana is causal for psychosis has been answered in the affirmative by applying the principles of causation used in pharmacological and epidemiological research. That comes from an organization called Johnny's Ambassadors. Uh, the lady that started it, her son experienced this and ended up committing suicide. The suicide rates are much, much higher for kids who use this stuff. And I'll just read a couple more quotes. This is from the medical journal Psychiatry. Considerable clinical evidence supports the hypothesis that adolescent neurodevelopmental exposure to high levels of the principal psychoactive component in marijuana, THC, is associated with a high risk of developing psychiatric diseases such as schizophrenia later in life.
Gosh.
Use of high potency cannabis at age 16 to 18 was associated with twice the likelihood of experiencing psychotic or having psychotic experiences. And then the last one that I'll read is probably from the world's expert on this topic, Eric Messamore. He's the medical director of an organization in the Midwest that researches schizophrenia. He says, the causal link between marijuana use and the development of psychosis is quite simply the most well-replicated high-impact finding in schizophrenia research today. And so letting kids know, I won't read them the quote just like that, but letting them know that there just is no doubt anymore that this is happening. For kids, we see kids in my practices for lots of different things, right? And some of them have dabbled with substance use, and I'll recommend that they come to individual counseling or outpatient counseling, right? I don't recommend they go to a residential treatment facility most of the time. Anytime I'm talking to a parent whose child is using this stuff, I'll just tell you what I tell them. You have to do anything you can possibly do to stop this, no matter how drastic it is. I cannot tell you how serious this is if your child continues to use this.
It leaves you speechless. But I'm so grateful for the research. I'm so grateful that you're sharing and that you're getting the word out. And I can tell by just watching and listening to you how passionate you are about reaching parents and reaching children. And I know parents have so much on their plate right now. There's so much that we're thinking about. But this is just, when I heard you, I'm like, this is urgent. This isn't just important. This is important and it's urgent. It's both. And so I so appreciate you sharing. Are there any final words that you really want to leave with parents right now? And then I have one more question after that.
Yeah. And so I only ever planned on treating adults. And during my post-grad internship, I worked at a psychiatric hospital because I was interested in studying schizophrenia in adults. And so I gained a specialty in that area. and then I had a specialty in addiction. And so, you know, it on the surface it seems coincidental that, I when those first kids started coming to see me, uh, they had seen other therapists before who just didn't know what was going on. They couldn't explain it, but what seemed coincidental, because I specialize in psychotic disorders and in addiction, we were able to catch it uh, first in the state of Georgia. Now I know that this is God's calling for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I always tell people when talking to them about, they're curious what God's calling is for them. What people group has God called them uh, to serve? I'll say whatever people group, whatever demographic God has laid a burden on your heart for, there's a good chance that's where God's called you. And the burden He laid on my heart after seeing that second kid is something I've rarely experienced in my life. And then the doors that He's opened to get this message out is supernatural. And I could go on and on and on about the opportunities God's given me and my team here to speak about this. And so, I want you to know that this is not only my passion as a clinician, this is my passion as a pastor, a Christ follower, and a husband, and a father of two boys.
Well, I'm so grateful that we can help to get the word out. I know parents are going to be so appreciative. I do, this one last question has come to mind. I heard you say just sort of in the comments below that you're on a board or a council about the legalization of marijuana, and it sounds like you are not for it. And so just, there are a lot of people that have different opinions about that, and this audience has probably varied opinions about that. And
Sure.
so, from your perspective and your experience, can you give a little bit of information about why you're against it, and what sort of a stand you would take on that?
Yeah, good question. And so it's called Georgians for Responsible Marijuana Policy. And we're one of the only voices at the table that is opposed to the legalization of marijuana. Uh, we have a $50,000 budget. Our opponents have over a $50 million budget. So we do a lot of lobbying down in Atlanta at the Capitol and to try to get some of the laws changed. And so the law in Georgia, and it goes, counties have to vote to adopt it, is that medical marijuana oil with 5% or less THC is legal. And what we're not doing is trying to prevent people who need these products from getting them, because there's a ton of evidence that it's really helpful for people with epilepsy, for people with Parkinson's disease. Uh, and it's not the THC that's helpful, it's the CBD and the other things in it. But it's almost impossible to separate all of the THC out without destroying the psychoactive properties of the CBD. And so, to Georgia's credit, they've gotten it as low as they could. So,
Okay.
we're not opposed to it being legal medically. We are opposed to how the law is currently written. We are pro it being prescribed by a medical doctor, just like pain medication would be prescribed. Uh, a controlled substance that's prescribed by a specialist for a very specific reason. Right now, anybody can go online and get a medical marijuana card in Georgia. The top two conditions they claim are chronic pain and PTSD. Uh, and so it's an uphill battle. But what I do think we're having success in, and have had success in, is I think we are much further away from recreational marijuana being legalized than most states are.
Mm-hmm.
and we're much further away from the THC level being increased. So now one of our battles is getting what's called the Delta 8 loophole closed. Delta 9 is the THC you normally think of. Delta 8 is super similar to it. It does the same thing that pot does, but it's legal. It's called the Delta 8 loophole. So we're trying to close that right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's just a great, I know every state is different, but I talk a lot about model legislation and understanding what certain states are doing, because, all the states use model legislation from other states to figure out where they're going and all these topics. So the fact that you've been talking about THC and parents, that's what parents need to educate themselves on, is the level of THC across the board, whether it's for policy or their family. So thank you so much for being on today. And any resources that you have, or resources that might help parents talk to their kids or point their children to a resource that will be impactful, please make sure you get that to us, and we'll put them in the show notes. But I so appreciate your work. I thank you for the clarity in which you're able to speak about it. And I just bless the passion and the calling that God's put on your heart. And I'm so glad that you were able to be on today.
Thank you. I'm grateful to have been invited, and thank you for giving me this platform to get this message out. And it's been great getting to know you and getting this opportunity. So thank you. God bless you.
Okay, parents, so that was heavy. That was a lot of information to take in, and I hope you stuck with it to sort of hear the end. We're going to get resources to you on this, but I think one of the things that we want to walk away with is there's a good chance that our kids know that this is going on, that they're living this, that they're watching this, that they're talking about it, and we're the ones that don't. And so having the information so that we can understand it and process it, but also come alongside our kids and have the conversation about what this does for their future. This isn't necessarily a scare tactic that we want to use. You heard Britt say that, but we do want to be informed parents and let our children know that we are informed and that likely they have the same information. Let's sit down and talk about it. So the resources are going to be critical. One of the other sort of connections that I made in this is, all the time when I'm talking about education and when I'm talking about the history of public education and what's going on and what's unfolding and parents are asking questions, I hear over and over and over, well, I went to public school and I turned out fine. And you've heard me say this before, we are not on the same planet in terms of what's happening in the school system. And I feel like a lot of us would have maybe that same approach when talking about this conversation. I smoked pot, or my friend smoked pot, or I had a joint here, nothing happened to me. You heard him say, I ate Cheetos and got fat. That we would have that same approach. I did this and I turned out fine. It's not a big deal. Again, this is not that. We're not talking about the same thing. And so hearing and understanding the THC levels, approaching your kids about that with specifics so that they know you're having an intelligent conversation with you and with them, and it's not just a fear tactic, I think is so critical. So I hope this information was helpful. I hope in the show notes we're able to give you some resources that will help you have conversations. And I hope that this helps you parent with purpose, disciple with direction, and leave an intentional legacy.